My name is Claire Harrison, and I'm 34 years old. 9 years ago, I was erased from my own family. At a gathering meant to bring us together, my brother's wife called me trash in front of everyone, and instead of defending me, my own brother slapped me and cut me out of his life entirely. From that moment on, I was cast aside, forgotten, ignored, treated as though I never belonged. For nearly a decade, I lived in silence while they thrived in arrogance, convinced the family fortune would one day be theirs. They mocked me as a failure, while they carried themselves like kings and queens waiting for their crowns. What they didn't know was that I was rebuilding myself in the shadows, preparing for a day they never thought would come. When our parents passed and the family gathered for the will reading, my brother and his wife walked in certain of their victory, already whispering about the life they'd build with their inheritance. But fate had a different plan. One sentence from the lawyer shattered everything they believed, flipping the story in 1 second. The sound of polished shoes against marble echoed through the old estate's grand hall, a rhythm that carried a weight of history. Chandeliers loomed above, casting fractured light across portraits of ancestors who stared down from gilded frames. Some faces proud, some stern, all of them silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. That was the stage where I found myself again, after nearly a decade of absence. Uninvited, unacknowledged, yet central to the story everyone thought they had already written. 9 years earlier, this same house had seen me humiliated. My brother's wife, draped in the confidence of someone who married into money, had turned to me in front of our gathered relatives and delivered a single word with venom: trash. The insult had floated into the air like smoke, stinging but unforgettable. My brother, rather than defending me, rather than seeing the cruelty in her tone, struck me across the face. One slap. It was enough to redefine blood ties, enough to carve a canyon between us. That moment became the quiet funeral of our sibling bond. And he made it permanent when he blocked me, erasing me from his life with one decision, as though I had never mattered. Everyone else followed his lead. No calls, no visits, no messages on holidays or birthdays. My absence was treated like a relief to them, as though one less burden had been lifted from their lives. My name stopped being spoken, replaced with silence or dismissive shrugs. They allowed the story to cement. I was the failure, the shadow, the one not worth keeping around. And I let them believe it. What none of them knew was that isolation became fuel. While my brother and his wife flaunted their entitlement, parading their supposed future inheritance as if it were already signed into their accounts, I rebuilt myself brick by brick. I moved quietly, studied relentlessly, worked until exhaustion was my only companion. My victories weren't shared at family tables or posted in group photos. They were private, deliberate, and sharp as a blade being forged in secret. By the time I returned to this estate, I was not the broken sister they remembered. I was someone else entirely, though they hadn't noticed yet. The air in the study where the will was to be read felt heavier than the rest of the house. My brother and his wife arrived first, arm in arm, exuding confidence. Their voices floated through the hall, just loud enough for others to overhear, discussing what they would do with their inheritance. She listed off renovations for properties she assumed would be hers, while he calculated investments and expansions. Their arrogance didn't waver, even when I stepped through the door. Her eyes narrowed the instant she saw me. "Well," she said, adjusting her pearls, "look who decided to crawl back. I thought ghosts didn't get invitations." My brother chuckled, though unease flickered in his expression when I didn't respond. I simply took a seat across from them, hands folded, posture calm. I didn't need to answer her. Words were unnecessary when the silence itself held more weight than any comeback. The lawyer entered shortly after, a man in a crisp suit whose presence pulled every gaze in the room. He carried a thick folder under his arm, the folder that contained the truth. As he settled into his chair, the murmur of voices died, leaving only the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. He looked at each of us in turn, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for being here," he began, his tone steady, professional. We are gathered to execute the final wishes of the late Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. His voice carried the authority of law, a reminder that what was about to be read was no longer subject to debate or protest. My brother leaned forward, eager, his wife barely able to conceal her smile. They were already living in a future they believed belonged to them. I watched them with the kind of patience that only 9 years of silence could cultivate. The lawyer cleared his throat, slid the document from the folder, and began. After consideration and careful decision, the entirety of the Harrison family estate, including all assets, properties, accounts, and holdings, shall be passed on in full ownership to. He paused deliberately, scanning the words as though to ensure no mistake could be made. Then his eyes lifted, sharp, locking onto me. To her. The word hung in the air like a dropped stone in still water. For a moment no one moved. My brother's expression froze, his lips parting slightly, as though caught mid-thought. His wife went pale, the confidence draining from her face in a visible wave. She clutched at her pearls with a trembling hand, the sound of beads shifting sharp in the quiet room. "What?" she managed to whisper, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. The lawyer repeated it with unflinching clarity. "The estate is left solely to her." My brother finally spoke, his voice unsteady, no longer the assured tone I had grown used to hearing when he dismissed me. There must be a mistake. Our parents." "There is no mistake," the lawyer interrupted, sliding the papers forward. "This is their signed and notarized will. Every clause, every asset, every decision is here. It was witnessed, verified, and confirmed." I watched their faces, the collapse of arrogance, the shattering of entitlement. For 9 years, they had built their lives around an expectation, an assumption that I had no place in this family, no worth, no claim. And in one sentence, the ground beneath them gave way. My brother's wife turned to me, desperation breaking through her mask. "You can't be serious. You, of all people, you don't deserve this. You don't even belong here." Her words echoed the insult from years ago, but this time, the slap came in silence. She no longer had the audience laughing with her, no longer had my brother shielding her cruelty. This time, she stood stripped of power. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The lawyer's voice carried the authority of truth, and the silence that followed was louder than any confrontation I could give. My brother sank back in his chair, eyes unfocused, as though trying to replay every moment that led to this. Perhaps he thought of that slap, of the instant he chose to cut me from his life. Perhaps he realized that betrayal has a way of circling back, sharper and heavier than when it was first delivered. The silence after the will reading followed us out of the study and into the hall, but it didn't linger long. My brother's wife broke it first, her heels striking the marble with quick, sharp steps as she cornered the lawyer. "There has to be some way to contest this," she demanded, her voice shaking but sharp. "She doesn't have the experience. She doesn't have the standing. Our parents wouldn't have done this to us." The lawyer, unmoved by her desperation, adjusted his glasses and replied evenly, "The document is airtight. Their decision was deliberate. If you attempt to contest it, you'll find little ground to stand on. Every detail has been accounted for. They made sure of that." Her face darkened. She wasn't used to being told no, and it showed. My brother remained seated, silent, his jaw clenched as though he was holding back words that burned too deep to release. I left them there, locked in their disbelief, and walked through the house I hadn't set foot in for nearly a decade. Each corridor carried memories they thought I no longer had. The framed photographs still showed family dinners, holidays, celebrations, moments I had been erased from after that night 9 years ago. My absence was the wound they ignored, but the house hadn't forgotten. When I stepped into the master study, I noticed a folder left on the desk. The lawyer had told me earlier that my parents had prepared everything thoroughly, leaving no room for doubt. Inside the folder was proof. Letters addressed to me, each sealed but dated across the years I had been away. They had written, but none of them had reached me. My brother's hand had controlled the mail in those years, and suddenly I understood why. They hadn't cut me off, he had ensured the silence. That realization sharpened everything. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had stolen the chance for reconciliation, buried their words before they could find me. While I had believed the family wanted nothing to do with me, he had orchestrated my exile. I returned to the study where he now stood, arguing with his wife in hushed but frantic tones. They stopped when I entered. I held up one of the letters unopened, still sealed with my parents' initials. "You kept these from me," I said, my voice steady, no accusation in my tone, just fact. My brother's face paled further. He knew denying it would be useless. "You don't understand," he muttered. "They wanted everything to go through me. I was supposed to lead this family. It was always going to be me." I set the letter on the table between us. "And yet here we are." His wife tried to recover her footing, her voice cutting through the tension. "So what? You think owning this house and some accounts makes you better? You can't run an estate like this. You're not capable." Her words carried the same venom as the insult she had thrown years ago, but this time it landed differently. Not because I was stronger, but because her fear was showing. She was no longer mocking from a place of security. She was scrambling to hold on to what she thought was hers. The lawyer re-entered then, placing more documents on the table. "There are stipulations. Control of all properties and accounts is immediate. Transfers begin tomorrow. Management rights are also hers alone. If either of you interfere, you'll be trespassing." His tone was blunt, without room for misinterpretation. The reality hit them harder than my presence had. This wasn't just a reading, it was the moment everything shifted. Their titles, their standing, their imagined future, gone. My brother finally looked at me, his voice low. "You think this makes us equal? You think sitting in that chair means you've won?" I didn't answer. His words weren't a question. They were a denial, a refusal to face what was right in front of him. The morning after the will reading began with silence across the estate. The staff, who had once taken orders from my brother and his wife, now looked to me with caution. Some avoided my gaze, unsure where their loyalty should stand. Others approached carefully, offering updates on the properties and accounts that were now under my name. It was clear. Control had shifted completely. Yet I knew my brother well enough to understand that silence from him was never peace. His pride would not allow him to simply vanish into defeat. He would come back, not with humility, but with force. The years had taught me to prepare for storms rather than hope they'd pass. By the third day, he returned. Not alone. His wife clung to his arm as though proximity could restore what they had lost. They arrived without calling, stepping into the estate as though they still belonged there. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, heavy with resentment. I met them in the grand hall, where light from the tall windows spilled across the marble. "This is no longer your house," I reminded him plainly. "You don't walk in here without permission." He smirked, though the cracks in his confidence showed. "You think a stack of papers and a lawyer's words erase everything? I built this family's reputation while you hid away. You don't deserve what you were given." "You built nothing," I replied. "You inherited attention. And you wasted it." His wife's voice cut in, sharp as ever. "You're making a mistake if you think you can handle this estate. You'll ruin it, and when you do, everyone will see we were right all along." The words didn't sting. They revealed her desperation, her terror of being irrelevant. Still, I didn't waste time arguing. "You came here for something," I said. "Say it and leave." He straightened, anger flashing across his face. "Sign it over to me. The estate, the accounts, everything. We both know you don't want this burden. You're not prepared for it." I let his demand hang in the air, then stepped closer so he couldn't avoid the truth in my eyes. 9 years ago, you slapped me in front of everyone. You erased me, buried every letter our parents wrote, and called it leadership. You told the family I wasn't worth their time. That decision cost you everything. And you think I would hand it back?" He faltered for the first time, his bravado slipping. His wife tugged at his sleeve, whispering for him to stop, but he pulled free. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You don't deserve any of it. I'll find a way to take it from you. Then you'll find yourself trespassing. I answered, and motioned for the staff to escort them out. They resisted, but eventually the echo of their departure faded down the drive. For weeks after, the estate became a battleground not of fists, but of influence. My brother filed challenges, sent letters through attorneys, tried to rattle me with threats of public shame. Each attempt collapsed under the strength of the will's wording. Every document had been prepared with precision. Our parents had ensured there would be no cracks to exploit. The truth was unshakable. It was mine. But his attacks revealed more than he intended. Hidden in the paperwork he filed were details about debts he had concealed for years. Loans under his name, properties mortgaged without the family's knowledge, accounts drained to maintain the life he paraded so confidently. He hadn't just wanted the inheritance, he needed it. Without it, the world he built was crumbling. The revelation spread quickly. Associates pulled away, banks closed in, and his reputation fractured. The man who once stood at the center of every family gathering now avoided the public eye. His wife, once so quick to speak, fell silent as whispers replaced admiration in every room they entered. I didn't need to lift a hand against him. His downfall was the result of his own arrogance. The truth simply reached the surface at last. Months later, I walked the halls of the estate with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Each portrait that lined the walls seemed to watch with approval rather than judgment. I had thought the inheritance was about property, but it became clear it was something greater. My parents had not left me wealth, they had left me vindication. They had seen through the false loyalty of my brother and had chosen differently. The last letter I opened from my mother's sealed folder said it plainly: "You were never forgotten. You were always the one we trusted to protect what mattered. That is why this estate is yours." Those words carried more weight than the deeds or the accounts. For 9 years, I believed I was discarded. In truth, I was chosen. As for my brother, I never saw him step foot on the estate again. His pride kept him away once it became clear no amount of schemes could restore what he had lost. His wife, stripped of the life she once flaunted, faded into the same silence they had forced on me. Their arrogance had been their crown, and when it slipped, there was nothing left to hold them upright. The story closed not with revenge shouted, but with a quiet reversal. I had been the one cast aside, called worthless, cut from the family. And yet in the end, it was they who stood outside the gates, empty-handed, forgotten by the very legacy they believed was theirs.